Hi everybody. Today is another project on the camper, and what I'm hoping to do is be able to replace this trim that goes around the entire outside of the camper. In this particular case, this Northern Light is made by sandwiching or clamshelling together two pieces of fiberglass, two halves, each half's made kind of like a boat, and then they're joined and overlapped and seamed right in this area. On top of that seam, there's this aluminum extrusion. It's white in this case, and then there's a plastic insert that goes in here. This one was replaced by the previous owner. Northern Light uses a white vinyl material that's pliable. You sort of fold it in half, stick it in there, and then it will expand, leaving a little rounded section here. But by doing that, it has some tabs or some edges that lock it into place. Unfortunately, this particular plastic that was used does not have that. You can see here underneath there's some plastic screws. That's part of what's holding the two halves of the camper together, along with some sealant. And this is really a mostly decorative piece to cover up those screws. I'm actually going to be using a little different product today. This is something that I've seen used on boats, for instance. I think it's used on some RVs with corner moldings, and I'll show you that in a little bit without getting into a lot of detail right now. But the idea here is I'm going to be walking around, pulling out all of this plastic. There's some places that are some screws that hold it together on some end points. I'll be taking those out. I will check all these screws, make sure they're all tight, and if there's anything loose, I will reseal it, tighten it back up, and then I'll install the new different style of plastic insert here that I will show you when I get ready to do that. So here's what I was talking about earlier. This trim, the aluminum extrusion has all the screws that hold it in, and whenever there's a change in direction on this trim, there is a screw inserted here to hold it into place. They also drilled a couple of little weep holes, presumably in case any moisture gets in there. I think the original manufacturer did that as well, so I think the previous owner just copied that when he installed this. So these are a square drive screw, pretty typical of most manufacturers, I think. He's used a lot in production. Really comes right out. Or I can see I'm doing that with one hand. Once you get those screws out, it just pops right off, especially this style. Yeah, all of the insert is now out. The screws are all exposed. So the next step for me is to go around and just check and see if I can snug up these screws. And again, if anything's noticeably loose, I'm going to unscrew it, put some silicone in there, and tighten it back up. One thing I should note is that the insert that I'm going to be using is not going to use screws here to hold the ends in place. And since these are some holes, I'm going to take some silicone and fill those holes whenever they show up. It's only about half a dozen of them. Let me get those all nicely sealed up before I get started. I went all the way around the camper, checked all of the screws, just used a hand screwdriver. This is kind of a ratchet one that I have with a square drive bit on the end of it. And I didn't find anything that I would call loose. Some of them turned maybe a 1/16 of an inch, just kind of snugged up a little bit as I put some pressure on it. I'd recommend doing them by hand so you can feel just how snug they are or are not. And also so that you don't strip things out, because depending upon the camper, you might have wood back here like the Northern Light does, or so I understand. Could be some aluminum. You don't want to accidentally over tighten that and strip out those screws. When I tried to figure out what I wanted to use in this trim, I took a look around on the internet for some different options and came up with a product that was on Amazon. It was Sorry for jumping around here, but between the poor lighting and the trains going by when I was in the storage facility, it was just difficult to do a good job recording this, and as it turns out, you really couldn't see much of what I was doing. So wanted to hit this here real quick, and then we'll jump back to the installation just to show you what I used. So this is a kit that I ordered. It's a sample kit, and when you try to buy these, you can you get them in different widths and different colors, and there's 1/2, 5/8, and 3/4 inch width, but it's hard to know on that width what exactly they're talking about. Is it the total width of the product? Is it the width of the opening? And there's some flexibility here as well. So the best thing to do is probably to go ahead and order one of these sample kits. And in this kit, they send, like I say, different widths and different colors, so you get a good look at them. And on the back will be labeled what the width is. So this is 1/2 inch. The colors were white, black, red, and in the 3/4 inch, they also sent one called Biscuit, which is basically an off-white, slight bit of beige to it. In my case, I ended up with the 3/4 inch white, and that fit perfectly. It couldn't have been a better fit if I'd custom measured it and custom made it. And these are, again, on Amazon, so you order the kit, figure out what works for you, and then go back on and order the actual roll of material. They include a list of what they sell here, and most of it is 24, 50, or 100-foot rolls. And in my case, I measured carefully, ordered a 50-foot roll, and I ended up with just under 3 feet of extra left over, so that was just right. But in my case, one 50-foot roll worked out perfect, and that's for a Northern Light 811. All right, with that in mind, let's head back to the warehouse and finish up the installation. And I'm going to start with the front wraparound portion, which will begin right here. I'll put it in a little bit longer than it needs to be and start working my way around the front to the corner on the other side. And when I'm done, I'll come back and trim this to fit. One thing I learned when I was working on boats is this stuff can have a tendency to shrink a little bit, which could leave a little bit of a gap here. So I'm going to try to compress it to make sure I get as much material in there as I can. So what I'm doing is putting the top slot into the extrusion here, and then just pushing the bottom piece into place until it locks in, and it's going pretty smoothly. You have to remember, I want to kind of compress it a little bit. There's a tendency to maybe want to pull it out and stretch it as you put it in. But as I mentioned, you can get some contraction later and maybe end up with a gap over here that you don't want. So I'm really trying to kind of just give it a little bit of a slight push as I work this in. So I just finished installing the insert on the front portion of the camper, and you can see here, I cut it a little bit long on this side. It went in very well. A couple of places here I'll come and touch up. I think it looks pretty good though. Has a nice, smooth, clean look to it without the edges of the extrusion overlapping here, and that the way it engages on the extrusion is sealed quite nicely, so I feel pretty good about that. And you can see this has come all the way back here, and again I've cut this slightly long. A little hard to work back here with this chain link fence separating us from the storage area here, but still doable. So I'm going to continue and do the back side sections, and when those are done, I will come in and do this little angled section here and trim the edges to fit nicely. And I'll pick up there. But the next thing I want to do now is to trim these edges. They're at an angle. So first thing I'm going to do is
just mark based on the extrusion where that seam is. I'll just make a little mark across here. This stuff trims quite well with a pair of scissors. So once I do that, I can just slowly come in here, do a decent job, and then cut that angle. If you're unsure, cut it just a tad long, come back and trim up a little bit at a time, but that really wasn't too hard to do. Got a little bit of an ink mark on there. Maybe a pencil would be better to use. I don't have a pencil with me, and this will do fine. I'm going to do the same thing up here. Again, probably cutting it just a tad long is not a bad idea. A little bit off on that one. Sort of snip it up a bit, trim it. Got a little bit too long here. And what you can see that is at the top where this piece bends down. There's not enough room for the end of it before it bends down. So I'm just going to clean that up a bit. Much better. That looks perfect. So for this piece, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put it in a little bit long and then trim it. So I'm going to do the same thing down here. Make a mark based on where I can see the extrusion steam sticking out. And I'll cut it just a tad long because I'm trying to compress this a bit. In fact, go ahead and just double check that. Here's what we got. I'm really pleased with the clean look this gives on the insert with the extrusion. So just to show you in the back here what I had to do. A couple tricky spots. There's a little jog here, which the other trim didn't want to stay in. This went through it pretty nicely. You can see this is a little messy here. Look for a future video where I clean this stuff up and reseal around here and a few other places. I'll put a little sealant here on the end, clean that up, but it went pretty well. It was a little tough to get in behind the awning mount here. It's electric awning, Carefree awning on the back. It was a little tricky getting it in behind here, but it wasn't too bad. I was able to push it up from one side and get it to lock in as I brought it around, and then the bottom stayed loose, but I was able then to come in and sort of put my hand up in here and work that into place. I did take the scissors, just the end where it was really hard to get in the back section here, and use those to go in and kind of finish putting that in place, but went in just fine. And yeah, so this side is done now. I'm going to go around and do the same thing on the other side, and then I think we can call this project done. So this project took less than 2 hours, including the time to record it, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Next thing I need to do is get it on the truck and get it out in the sun with some decent light so you and I both can get a good look at how it turned out. So with the black line gone, that just helps remove some of the choppiness to the look. And I think having the white trim in there will just make that look a little better and won't break it up as much. So take care, drive safe, and get out there and enjoy the world. See you later, everybody.